Good afternoon. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for signing up. We've got an hour allocated. We may not use the full hour. Might hopefully be able to give you some time back at the end, but there's a number of slides I want to share with you, some of which I'll talk to in more detail than others. Some will very much be for information only, but we will provide you with the deck and it will be more widely available after today. So we're here to talk about engineer maintenance technician apprenticeship standards, both single and dual skilled, which many have seen as a replacement for maintenance and operations engineer and technician. Well, as we've all known to love it over the years, MOE. Prefer Clico myself, but nothing wrong with a drop of MOE occasionally. So that's what we're here to talk about. And in terms of the content today, I just want to position Energy and Environment Awards. We are a new awarding organisation. We traded as EUIAS previously, which was the trading name of Energy and Utility Skills, our parent company. I just really want to position Energy and Environment Awards as an Ofqual regulated awarding organisation, talk about the apprenticeship standards themselves, and there's some additional detail in there which I will make reference to, but won't share in detail, but it might be useful for you in terms of information post-event. Talk about the proposed endpoint assessment for each of the two standards, some of the factors to consider in deciding which standard to use, single or dual disciplined. I think the one thing to remember, the absolute key thing to remember, these are two discrete standards in their own right. I've been asked many times, can you transfer from one to the other? Well, of course you can, but there's impact from that, and there's things to consider in that. What the changes mean and the impact on organisation deliveries, apprenticeship standards, our EPA offer, and then talk a little bit about the qualification, the regulated qualification that we have developed to complement these apprenticeship standards. So we know from research, and I know from previously working for a provider, that there are a whole plethora of qualifications used to underpin and support the delivery of MOE previously. So we've taken the opportunity to develop a brand new qualification, which is an exact mirror for the single and dual discipline apprenticeship standard, and therefore can be used as a non-mandated qualification. Let's stress that as part of the delivery programme. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about planned changes to apprenticeship assessment. So endpoint assessment as we know it is coming to an end. There's lots and lots of controversy around what's been proposed. We've seen some initial drafts of assessment plans, and I think it's worth sharing where that might be heading, the direction of travel, even if we don't know the exact detail currently. And I'm more than happy to open up for questions at the end. So hopefully that's what you've signed up to today. A little bit about who Energy and Environment Awards are. So we replaced Energy Utility Independent Assessment Service, which in itself was a regulated awarding organisation, but was a trading name for Energy and Utility Skills, which we are still a part of. So Energy and Utility Skills Group, and we are a subsidiary organisation to the group structure, but we are a separate legal entity. So Energy and Utility Skills is a member-based organisation, very much involved in influence and policy and workforce projections and skill requirements. Just launched our skills strategy through to 2030 with support of the sector. The awarding organisation is a separate legal entity, but all of our profits from the awarding organisation go back to group to reinvest back into the sector. So whilst we are a profit-making organisation as an AO, none of our profits will ever go to shareholders. Our boards are made up of non-exec directors, and there is no shareholding issue. I think that's hugely important in the current climate with some of what we've seen with other awarding organisations in the last few weeks and months, and in terms of their ownership and some of the practices that have gone on alongside those ownership changes. We are wholly owned by Energy Utility Skills. We commenced trading the 1st of August 2025. We were formed sometime before that as a limited company. We are regulated by Ofqual. We currently offer endpoint assessment for over 30 apprenticeship standards. We also started to offer in the last couple of years and increasingly more, building that portfolio around regulated qualifications, some of which have been generic, like first aid in confined spaces. Some are very, very industry specific around substation fitting and escape gate repair on gas, for example, and network construction operations for water and gas, but also some generic stuff around engineering maintenance technician. And Energy and Environment Awards incorporates EUSR. EUSR is our non-regulated offer based on industry schemes. We've currently got in excess of 300,000 people on a register, a skills register, and between them, something in excess of 800,000 accreditations. So we hold the register for people to access sites within energy utilities. On average, the individual holds about 2.5 registrations each. So that's just to position Energy and Environment Awards. It will be a new name to you. We've only been trading since the 1st of August, but we come with a rich history in endpoint assessment, and we were one of the very first to deliver endpoint assessment at the very outset of these reforms some 10 years ago. Just going to recap to the past, really. As you know, hopefully you know by now, MOE ceased to exist as an apprenticeship standard for new registrations from the 31st of December 2025. One huge caveat to that, because the new wind turbine maintenance technician standard isn't ready, there's been some concession from Skills England, and you can still register learners on MOE wind turbine pathway through to the end of June 2026. If you didn't win wind turbine delivery, then MOE is still available for registrations. Anything else, it ceased to exist from the end of December 2025. One standard, 7 specialist roles. The one thing about MOE, it had no duties. It only had 4 core knowledge statements, no mandatory qualification. As we know, 3 assessment methods and a funding of 26,000, and massively successful. Somewhere around about 2,000 registrations a year across about 123, 124 providers in England. Very, very well respected, well known, well used, and something that's stood the test of time. But clearly, the standard itself wasn't written in the most modern way that we reflect standards currently. These next 2 slides, I'm not really going to go into a huge amount of detail about, other than to say we've got a single skilled, a dual skilled. And a single skilled, as unsurprisingly, will cover electrical maintenance, mechanical maintenance, and instrumentation and control. And certainly from my time working for a large provider between 2020 and 2023, it was interesting, and always interesting debate with employers as whether they wanted a specialist single skilled engineer or they were increasingly looking for a multi-skilled engineer. And it depended who you talked to at any given time, and it seemed to change from one year to the next. So I think what these 2 standards have done is actually capture the fact that for those who want single skilled, we've got one, and for those who want dual skilled, then likewise we have an option available, and therefore we've covered all bases. The reason really for the next sort of 6 bullet points, if you like, from core duties through core knowledge and core skills, is really to emphasise the explicit change in the standard. The first thing I'm going to say is, if you deliver a really, really strong, robust, comprehensive syllabus for engineering maintenance, nothing should change. Because ultimately, whilst the standards have changed, engineering hasn't. Yes, we see practices evolve, of course we are. Yes, we see new techniques, we've seen the impact of artificial intelligence, but ultimately, maintenance technicians haven't changed in terms of their core skills and core knowledge. However, what these standards do, and it does have implications for things like how you record progress, let's say, for example, on OneFile or Smart Assessor, it certainly has an impact in terms of how you undertake progress reviews. It certainly has impact in terms of how you prove a gateway. Somebody's met all the learning requirements. There are significantly more in the way of knowledge and skill statements, both core and specific. And I think that's the first thing to bear in mind. Whilst your syllabus might be absolutely, on the money in terms of meeting the requirements, it is well worth comparing your syllabus against the skills and knowledge in these standards. Likewise, with dual skilled, you've got two options. You've got E&I, or instrumentation and control electrical, or electromechanical. Those are the two options within dual skilled. And again, you've got your core duties, core knowledge, and specific knowledge and skills. What's been quite clever in how these two standards have been developed, the skills and knowledge are a direct mirror. So there's no skills and knowledge in dual skilled that doesn't appear in single skilled. So there are potential here for economies of scale in terms of how you deliver these programs. You don't need to keep the two groups, a single skilled or dual skilled, separate to each other. There's certainly commonality in learning, commonality in assessment. So clearly, where it's dual skilled, there are a greater number of specialist skills and knowledge to be proven, but ultimately those skills and knowledge are the same that appear in single skilled, but are grouped together for the purposes of the standard itself. The endpoint assessment varies to a degree. So, and this is the endpoint assessment for the standard as it's currently written and approved. And I think we all know, I hope you all know, that endpoint assessment is coming to an end. We are moving much towards a significantly different approach to how we assess the outcomes of an apprenticeship standard. I will touch a little bit more on that towards the end of this webinar. But for now, I think we have to manage the now, the here and now. But for apprentices on this standard currently, with this assessment plan, we still have a knowledge test, a practical observation, and an interview. And you can see from that clearly the single discipline is slightly shorter in duration, with slightly fewer questions on the knowledge test, slightly shorter in duration and questions on the observation, and likewise on the interview. Those are tried and tested assessment methods, what we've all become extremely familiar with MOE. Nothing particularly changes in that context, other than, of course, you've got significantly more knowledge and skills to cover and to prove and to evidence. The good news in all of this, of course, is that a skill or a knowledge is only assessed once. And within the standard and within the endpoint assessment plan, you will find explicit information on which assessment method covers which skill and which knowledge. And that certainly, I believe, helps with preparation for endpoint assessment, in so much that it's very clear which knowledge is being tested by the knowledge test, and therefore that might shape the study and the revision. And likewise, it's very clear what must be proven at observation, and therefore also very clear of what needs to be included in the portfolio. I call it the showcase portfolio. It's an old term from the early days of these reforms, but the EPA portfolio, if you like, very clear which skills and which knowledge are covered by that interview, and therefore that would shape the kind of evidence that the apprentice might present their very best work, I suspect, from the latter end of their on-program phase, their practical phase, and obviously work products and work reports and evidence from the workplace that they can talk to in great detail about how they went about that job and how they delivered a successful outcome. So nothing unfamiliar to us in either of those, other than some slight tweaks to timing and number of questions. So in terms of factors to consider, clearly there is a requirement in the funding rules for a skill scan. That hasn't changed. That's always been a requirement. There's also a clear requirement to consider recognising prior learning. So if you've got somebody who has some experience in engineering, then you need to take that into account in terms of what they currently have and therefore don't need to relearn. And ultimately, it's the job that the employer has in mind for the apprentice, which will determine whether they do single or dual discipline. I know certainly in the past, from talking to some providers, that some providers held back from deciding a pathway within MOE until such time that the apprentice had time to settle into the organisation, settle into the workplace, and the job become much clearer. That is more difficult because these are two different standards. And therefore, at the very outset, certainly your sales team or your business development team, your employee engagement team, whatever we call them, need to be very clear with the employer what is the job role and which standard is it best mapped to. So maybe a functional analysis of some description, taking the skills and knowledge from the standard and deciding whether or not there is sufficient scope, sufficient depth and breadth within the apprenticeship standard to justify dual, or whether or not there is only enough depth and breadth in the job role to justify a single discipline, mechanical, C&I or electrical. And in terms of duration, my mind has gone absolutely blank. From memory, I think it's 42 months or 48 months. Steve, do me a favour, can you give a quick check on that one? I know the dual is definitely typically 48 months. My mind has gone absolutely blank on the duration of the single. It's either 36 months or 42. I'll confirm that in a second. So skill scans, absolutely mandatory. Basically identifying where an apprentice is at the start of their programme. And if they're 16, straight out of school, likelihood is they're going to require the entire syllabus in the entire learning programme. For somebody who maybe has done a 2-year study programme in college, there might be some of the learning programme they don't need to do as part of the apprenticeship, and therefore the rules of recognising prior learning would be applied. That comes, of course, with a challenge that technically you should reduce the funding you claim. I know that has some challenges internally, particularly from finance teams and finance directors. So that's always a sensitive subject. But a skill scan is mandatory, and it's clearly a part of making sure that the learner has the very best experience and isn't forced into learning and developing a skill or knowledge that they currently have. I would definitely look to map your current syllabus, if you haven't already done it, to the KSPs with the skills and knowledge within these standards. There are some significant differences, albeit at awareness level. So certainly within some of the knowledge, there's things like the UK government's net zero ambition targets. There's things in there around GDPR, for example. So there are things in there that might not typically have been delivered as part of a normal engineering program in the past. And it's those sort of nuances, those subtleties, I guess, that need to be thought through in terms of who's going to deliver that learning, if it's not the within the sort of skill set of the normal trainer or lecturer. But always bearing in mind, it's at awareness level in terms of knowledge and understanding. This is not about comprehensive understanding of net zero targets and recycling and waste management and the like. The off-the-job training, as you know, we moved away from 20%. We've moved away from 6 hours a week. We now have a minimum number of hours for each apprenticeship standard. I'm sure you're aware of that. It is a minimum number, and that minimum number can be delivered in a variety of ways. I think most engineering providers seem to have maybe a front-loaded program, quite an intensive first-year program typically. And actually that takes that into account. So over the duration of the apprenticeship standard, you're looking for those minimum hours to be delivered. I think where one of the challenges does exist with the explicit nature of the KSBs within this apprenticeship standards is that ultimately you have to evidence a significantly greater number of skills and knowledge than perhaps we did in the past. So if you're using one file and you're using journals or evidence from the workplace, you're actually mapping them against a far greater number. So there's perhaps an education piece there for the apprentices, but also probably an education piece there for those who are supporting apprentices, either in direct delivery or in some sort of pastoral mentoring, coaching kind of role. Progress reviews, likewise, as we undertake progress reviews, like typically 12, 13 weeks, then we use in the greater detail, the more explicit nature of those KSBs to record progress against or on that journey to Gateway, and Gateway does still currently exist as a concept within these standards. Again, we might still reverse that and say the explicit nature of the KSBs, explicit nature of skills and knowledge, actually is a bonus, is a benefit. We have absolute clarity now on what we are teaching. We have absolute clarity on what we're assessing, and we have absolute clarity on what we're conducting progress reviews against. So I think in many cases people see that as a bonus, and something that was actually fundamentally was missing from BOE was the explicit nature of that skills and knowledge. Clearly formative assessment, so assessment of progress on that journey, if you like, from initial weeks on the programme right through to the employer signing them off as competent and ready for endpoint assessment, or that formative assessment gauging the progress in the workplace to ensure that they are ready for endpoint assessment. And as always, and in every case, we would always encourage, and we do encourage, and we provide materials to support the process. We would always encourage everybody to do endpoint assessment preparation, and where possible, do mock interviews, mock observations, mock question papers. Our guidance material will always have mock papers contained within it. We have mock documentation that very much mirrors what we use as an assessment team. This is not about catching people out. This is about catching people in. This is about catching people on the very best performance they can give on a given day, because ultimately this is about them getting a substantive role, enhanced remuneration, and being given the passage, if you like, to working autonomously and without supervision. So hugely important that endpoint assessment preparation is undertaken with all apprentices. Not going to touch a huge amount on this. I think I've covered some of this already, but certainly some of the things to think about and changes to make will be around staff training. Right from your school engagement teams out talking to careers advisors, talking to teachers, talking to young people, talking to parents and guardians and influencers about the potential and the opportunity that exists within these new standards. What roles are you recruiting against, and making sure that we're mapping the role that the employer is looking to fill against the standard that mirrors the best match to the job. Looking at the whole initial assessment process, particularly around skill scans, eligibility criteria. The criteria still exists around the fact that you have to develop substantial new skills. So one of the questions I'm asked quite often, if you completed a single discipline apprenticeship standard and you want to do a dual disciplined, is it possible? That's not for me to say, that's for you as an organisation to determine whether or not they meet the criteria of developing substantial new skills, on the basis that if you go on to do a dual discipline from a single, then obviously they will have already been proven competent in one aspect of that dual skilled role. So that's one thing to think about. The other question we'll also ask a lot is, can you move from one standard to the other? Yeah, of course you can, as you can with any other standards. The thing to bear in mind, of course, these aren't pathways, they are standards in their own right. They have their own STO number, and the things that would be impacted by any change would be that the minimum duration of the programme would start the clock ticking again. The number of hours for off-the-job training would start the clock ticking again. And also it might have a significant impact on your qualification achievement rates, on the basis that somebody moving from one standard to the other hasn't concluded and completed the first one, and therefore was seen as being a non-achiever. So yes, it's possible to move from single to dual, or dual to single even, but I think there are things to consider. There are impacts for the organisation in terms of what that might be. And I think therefore the functional analysis and the skills scan at the very start of the programme becomes absolutely critical in getting the very best match. The delivery itself, we talked a little about syllabus and curriculum and off-the-job training. And then obviously those who are out on the road, employee engagement, business development, sales and marketing teams, your assets and collateral, whether digital or more traditional, whether you're online and offline marketing. It's about making sure that your employers in particular are aware of the changes to these standards, but also schools and parents and guardians. So making sure really that we are very clear that there's a greater opportunity than perhaps there was in Moe, much more explicit requirements within the job, and those are some of the things to consider. In terms of our offer, we have both standards operational. So where you are signing an apprentice up for for the apprenticeship standard, either single or dual, then you can, if you so wish, choose Energy Environment Awards as your EPA partner. We are operational. We do have comprehensive apprentice guidance. We always have done, and detailed specifications. And where we are able to, we have amplified knowledge statements. So where there's a knowledge statement within a standard, we have, where we can, try to amplify that to give the apprentice the very best chance of understanding the context of that knowledge statement, but also giving the delivery team the best chance of making sure the syllabus is deep enough and broad enough to cover the full extent of that knowledge statement. And I always say to people with knowledge statements, you often see quite, certainly in health and safety, quite extensive statements. A comma should be read as an and, not an or. So where you see commas in knowledge statements, it's always should be taken as an and rather than an or. It's not optional. We do have a portfolio template guide to help shape the formation of the MPOC assessment portfolio. And for this standard, and I'm more than happy to reward you for your attendance today by sending you, we have developed revision guides for both single and dual discipline for the apprentice as part of their revision, their study for endpoint assessment for the knowledge test. That's the first time for us. I believe it's probably one of the first times across most award organisations. Those revision guides we have in electronic format. We also have them in printed format. And I'm more than happy as attendees today to send you both the single and dual disciplined revision guides. Just have a look at, see what you think, provide some feedback to us, and use if you wish to do so as part of your planning for the preparation of endpoint assessment. And we've also made available a regulatory qualification. As I said earlier, it's a direct mirror of the apprenticeship standards. It covers every single skills and knowledge. It's contained in both single and dual disciplined, and that is available as a qualification. Just want to share a quote with you that we have had recently from Cheshire College. We had a challenge presented to us in July last year. A number of organisations, Cheshire College was one, New College Durham was two, and others who had problems with the assessment of a particular apprenticeship standard, not Moe, I hasten to add. And we were able to find a solution very quickly to ensure that all the apprentices undertook their endpoint assessment before the end of the academic year on the 31st July. And this was a comment that Steph Wright, this is director at Cheshire College, shared with us on the back of that. Very responsive, very agile, very flexible and dynamic approach we took to support them to achieve their ambitions, to get their apprentices over the line through endpoint assessment at very, very short notice. And that's clearly one that we are massively proud of. In terms of the qualification itself, it is a level 3 diploma. It's a big chunky call. You've got, as you would expect, the pathways, which are electrical, mechanical, instrumentation and control. And then you've also got the dual discipline pathways, which reflect the apprenticeship standards. They are regulated by Ofqual. They're aimed at the 16 plus, and they're aimed at those who are working as engineer maintenance technicians, whether they're doing the apprenticeship or otherwise. This could be delivered as a standalone qualification. It can be delivered to experienced workers, where somebody wants a recognised qualification, but it was developed specifically to support providers in delivering the new engineering maintenance technician apprenticeship standards. Clearly can lead to further qualifications or apprenticeships. One thing to say on this, this qualification is not currently funded, but it certainly meets the requirements as a non-mandated qualification as part of the apprenticeship. And the purpose and objectives of the qualification was to develop the technical skills and knowledge to align to the apprenticeship standard. We have worked with employers, providers and technical experts in its development. I do think there's probably one or two people on the call today who've had some involvement in the development of the qualification. And as I said previously, it can be delivered as a standalone qual or as part of the apprenticeship programme. And because it absolutely mirrors the skills and knowledge, you can explicitly deliver this qualification as part of the on-programme phase, the practical phase. The only aspect you can't claim for will be the registration and certification costs. So it comes with an assessment strategy. This is assessed through a portfolio of evidence, so it's either assessed in a training environment, realistic working environment, if you like, or the workplace. And it is assessed with typical and traditional competence-based assessment methods. So things like observation, witness testimony, work products, reflective accounts, professional discussion, Q&A. So traditional evidence methods that might have been used in an MVQ in the past, but are still used in competence-based qualifications. So that is the current format of the assessment approach. We do have a guidance pack as part of the learning assessment journey and the various declaration forms and matrices required in terms of recording and mapping. You will need to be a qualified assessor, qualified IQA. It's very much mirrors the requirements you expect of most regulated qualifications. And of course, those people have to be occupationally competent in what they're assessing and IQA in. And it's externally quality assured by us as the awarding organisation. So that's it in terms of the apprenticeship standards and the qualification. And I will pick up any questions when we get to the end. Just want to talk a little bit about what the future looks like. And to say it's absolutely clear would perhaps not be the most honest opinion to give. But what we do know is in February of last year, during National Apprenticeship Week, there were various statements made by various ministers and policy decisions made that will change the face of apprenticeship standards and change the face of endpoint assessment or apprenticeship assessment, as it will become known, as we move forward. And the plan and assumptions are currently that the current endpoint assessment plans will all be replaced by August 2026. I don't think that's achievable. I think most people would say it's probably not achievable. That is the current Skills England position. Skills England obviously having replaced IFATE. They are of the view that they can review every single endpoint assessment plan for every single standard in every single sector by August 2026. And there are significant changes. And I'm just literally today is about giving you the heads up to keep an eye on what's happening. We will rerun a series of roadshows in the end of February and throughout March across the UK as and when we see patterns emerge of what those changes look like. So in terms of some of the changes to language, you can see them there. Endpoint assessment becomes apprenticeship assessment. We will no longer be an EPAO, which has been an assessment organisation. Gateway as a concept will be gone. So the whole concept of somebody doing a 3-year, 42, 48-month programme, then being declared competent by their employer and ready for endpoint assessment, that concept will be gone. And actually some of the assessment, if not all of the assessment, might take place during the practical phase of the on-programme phase, and then endpoint assessment simply becomes known as assessment. So what are we expecting? First of all, that we remove duplication. So one of the things that's been looked at is where there is a mandated qualification within an apprenticeship standard, the view is that any endpoint assessment, as it currently is, or apprenticeship assessment as it will become, should not need to reassess what the mandated qualification has covered. So there are 3 assessment plans, indicative assessment plans, that have been released, and one of them is for accountants. And the accountancy apprenticeship standard has an AAT qualification contained within it, and the conclusion of the review of that assessment plan was that no other assessment was required other than the qualification. So again, quite a significant change to where we've been previously. Assessment is designed to take place throughout the duration of the apprenticeship. We've already seen in the foundation apprenticeships, for example, some rationale that takes into account the fact that there is some initial learning for apprentices around safety, and actually some of that assessment of safety, knowledge and understanding can be done at the early stage of an apprenticeship. But there is clearly a move towards assessment that's designed to take place throughout the duration of the apprenticeship. The one thing to think about is somebody who joins at 16 with no prior experience is not going to demonstrate competence in a highly skilled, technical and safety critical sector until some significant time into their apprenticeship. And therefore, whilst the opportunity there is for assessment to take place throughout the duration of the apprenticeship, one of the considerations is that apprentice ready to be assessed, summatively assessed as part of their apprenticeship, because have they acquired the necessary skills and knowledge, and can they apply them consistently in a range of contexts within their job role? There is certainly a move towards enabling providers to do some of the assessment themselves. I know that some providers have welcomed that and are very keen on that. I also know that some employers, particularly in our sector, safety critical and highly technical, are saying, we do not want providers doing the assessment. However, it is very clear that the providers will be enabled to carry out some of the assessments of the apprenticeship standard. And therefore, it becomes a very interesting dynamic where the awarding organisation might do one part of the assessment, let's say the multi-choice question paper. The provider does a second part, maybe the observation, but actually the awarding organisation then becomes the external quality assurance organisation for the observation aspect. So you start to get a very tiered approach to responsibilities, even for the same apprentice. Assessment organisations, like ourselves, will still have the responsibility for shaping the assessment and ensuring the validity of outcomes and ensuring those outcomes are standardised. What you'll find, if you haven't already seen the new assessment plans, is that we now have what they term assessment outcomes. So basically, they will group together, a little bit like you would with a duty, group together knowledge and skills to create an assessment outcome. The assessment outcome must be assessed. Every assessment outcome must be assessed. However, this is what's called absolute furore, particularly in the construction sector, is that in the new assessment plans that we've seen, there are skills and knowledge that must be assessed, and the skills and knowledge that can be assessed. So across the entirety of the skills and knowledge in the apprenticeship standard, they'll be grouped in assessment outcomes, and within those assessment outcomes, some of them will have to be assessed and some are optional. And certainly the construction industry have written to Prime Minister to say the skills and knowledge are listed for a reason. For somebody who's competent, and the example given was a carpenter, somebody who's competent as a carpenter needs all of those skills and knowledge, and therefore all of those skills and knowledge need to be assessed and can be applied. And in their words, or we risk another Grenfell. And as a result, the work on revising some of the construction-related assessment plans has been paused. The assessment plan will define one mandatory assessment method. So, for example, I saw a draft yesterday for EPPE, which is Electrical Power Protection Engineer. I can't remember the exact full title. It's a level 4 apprenticeship standard, and the proposed assessment method is observation. I hold the view you cannot deem somebody competent by observation alone. And then there were optional assessment methods, and that included a portfolio of evidence, a multi-choice question paper, or a knowledge test, or a technical interview. But the assessment plan explicitly only required one assessment method. So what you might find, awarding organisations like ourselves, where there's multiple players working with the same standard, will have different requirements in terms of what those assessment methods might be. There's certainly an encouragement around technology and digital tools, and there's certainly some clarity around how and when assessment will occur. The concept of somebody getting to a gateway, being signed off by an employer, and going through a formal third-party assessment called endpoint assessment is disappearing. The 3 plans that have been launched are publicly available. They have not gone live, they are indicative, and we're currently in the first tranche of assessment plans up for review, and it's about 4 or 5 hours. And I do believe lead engineering maintenance technician is one of those standards currently being looked at with the assessment plan being reviewed. I wouldn't expect engineering maintenance technician to be in the first or second tranche, and is likely to come towards the later stages of the work. But if you think of all the things we discussed earlier, that's the here and now. That endpoint assessment plan that we talked about, the knowledge test and the observation and the technical interview, will change, and the current plans will change for apprentices moving forward. And that's it from me, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
We did have one in the chat, but from Stephen Brown, but I believe he's had his question answered. It was, will the new assessments be carried out by the IEPAs? But I think you might have already answered that in your presentation.
I think the key thing to remember is, as engineering maintenance technician is currently at, all endpoint assessment will be undertaken by the endpoint assessment organisation. The assessment plan will change. There's no plan; it's not currently being reviewed, but it will be, and there is no doubt that when that is changed, providers will be enabled to undertake some of that assessment themselves.
Hi, David. I've got a question. It's Gary from Kimberley Clark in Barrow Mill.
Hi, Gary. How are you doing?
Oh, yeah, good, thanks. You mentioned at the start that the Moorway apprenticeship has been very successful, and it's had a big uptake of employers and training providers signing on to it. What's the rationale behind why this is all then changing after not too long in the pipeline, shall we say? Because, we're just getting used to the process. We're getting comfortable with how it should operate and streamlined it so that it's successful. And then for it to be changed again is just like a frustration, but
I think it's a frustration for us all. One thing I would say about Moe, I think it lacked detail, and I think it was open to interpretation, open to variation. It did allow people to be very creative in terms of how, because there was so little explicit nature with skills and knowledge in particular. You might argue that it had the potential for some gaps. clearly it didn't meet with the modern way of writing an apprenticeship standard. So forgetting the reforms for a second, MOE didn't have duties, for example. It lacked detail in terms of explicit knowledge and skills. So MOE was always going to be reviewed, Gary. As successful as it was, and massively successful in terms of about 2,000 plus registrations every year, it was always going to be subject to review, as any iterative process would be. It's just that it's clearly these reforms have also come into play. But I will absolutely stress what we've got with engineering maintenance technician at the moment. I believe one is a better standard, much more explicit, much more clear what's expected. It covers single and dual in a much more explicit and clear way than it perhaps did previously. And we still have endpoint assessment as we've known it for the last 10 years. The other things that are changing, it's hard to understand what drove it. I've got personal views I probably won't share today, but there was a movement to reduce the cost of endpoint assessment and for more of the money to stay within the education sector, particularly within colleges and providers. And there were certainly some campaigns, high-profile campaigns. And I think what's happened is somebody said, well, if we let providers do some of the assessment themselves, then we can keep more money in the sector. And I've got no issue with that. I think that's absolutely true. I think there's also a little bit about that where there was mandated qualifications in standards, there certainly was duplication. So it's good that we're removing that, because that was unfair to apprentices. Have they gone too far? Our sector, energy and utilities, so you're talking about power, gas, water, wastewater, renewables. I think the view from our sector is that sampling is dangerous, and actually they want the assessment of all skills and knowledge, and them being applied. And there's certainly some pressure on to that extent. The Skills Federation certainly have raised that issue with Skills England. As it currently stands, what I've shared with you today is where we're at today on the 22nd of January. Will we be in exactly the same position by the end of August, September? Who knows? But we will endeavour to keep people informed. As I say, we're fully intending to go out on the road towards the end of February, March across England to update and to share what we know and to give examples and to hypothesize around what that might mean for employers, providers, awarding organisations, but most importantly, what does that actually mean for apprentices?
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
I have a question from Stephen Brown. He's asked, when is the plan change to the assessment process?
Stephen, thanks for the question. Skills England's planning is that all assessment plans will have been reviewed and published by end of August 2026 this year. However, that doesn't necessarily mean they go live immediately, and doesn't necessarily mean that all apprentices have to transfer across to them. But the current plan and assumption is that all assessment plans will be revised by August 2026. And then obviously each awarding organisation who's offering apprenticeship assessment under those plans will then have to develop their offer, if you like, and the materials, so that there will be a phased period before they go live and before they're fully adopted. My pleasure. Any other questions, any observations? Okay. So in terms of just summing this up, first of all, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for getting up an hour of your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it. As I said, we are out on the road. I think we're heading to Bristol, Newcastle, Birmingham, London, and Manchester from memory. We still to confirm those dates. Once we have those dates confirmed, of course, we will let you know. It will be free of charge. We don't charge for these kind of events, and we'll be looking to deliver a half-day event just to share with you what we are seeing in terms of the assessment plans that are coming out from Skills England, and what we are doing in terms of shaping our thinking of how we then deliver them and the impacts from them. I think the other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that where providers want to do some of that assessment themselves, no problem. But the whole requirement for qualified and occupationally competent assessors who are independent of the apprentice might be a challenge for some. It's certainly one thing to think about, because clearly qualified assessors, qualified IQAs will be part of that process. We will publish this webinar online. Joe, if you can make a note of who's attended, and we'll send everybody a digital copy of the revision guide for EMT as a thank you, both dual and single skilled. If anybody's got any questions from today, then please drop me a line, david.morgan@energyenvironmentalawards.co.uk, or just into our generic inbox, and I'll pick it up. And just say thanks to my team, Joe and Steve for supporting, and hopefully look forward to seeing you face to face at one of the venues across the country towards the end of this financial year. But thank you ever so much.